So today we're going to find out, we're going to answer the question as to what is an asymptote or an asymptote. However you want to say it, it doesn't really matter. I have teachers that say asymptote, I have teachers that say asymptote. It doesn't matter. The main thing is to understand actually what it is versus how to say it. So what I'll do here is just graph a line, or I'll put a line up here. And if you came from one of the videos, then you'll probably came from the video that was y is equal to 2 to the power of x. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. But we're looking at exponential growth functions, but in asymptote it's going to work the same across the board. It doesn't matter what it was. But when we graphed it, the graph, and just to make it easy for you guys, because we're going to focus on more what the asymptote is versus how we got the graph. But if we have a graph like this, we want to find out what our asymptote is. Well, when you have a function like this already, you basically want to say that you can't do anything where y is less than 0. So here you would say your asymptote is basically this imaginary line at y equaling 0. And we'll go into detail as to why that is. But before I do that, let's just understand what an asymptote means on the graph. It basically means that no matter how far we stretch this graph out, so even if we continue the graph to go further, it'll get really, really close to this line, but it will never actually touch it or cross it. And that's what the asymptote is. It will never touch or cross. And that's what you want to make sure you understand when we're looking at the graphs, that the line will never touch or cross. So that's the main thing you want to take and look at on your notes with that. And the reason why is because there is, if we looked at this function right here, and you're going to see them in so many different ways, but I want you to understand what the asymptote is. So it basically makes it not possible. There's nothing that it can do to make that possible. So when we're doing here, and if we're looking at this graph, it asks for domain and range. Well, your range is your y values. So range is for your y values. So we'll do R for range. It's for y values. And that's basically telling us what are y values possible. Well, here we would say y has to be greater than 0. Because we can't do anything less than y, or less than 0, that would make it possible. So that's why it's at y equals 0. So our asymptote here is at y equals to 0. Now I know that might be very confusing, and honestly what I tell my students all the time, don't even really worry about that. Just know that your asymptote is basically this imaginary line right here where it can never touch or cross. So that's the main thing you want to understand when we're dealing with asymptote.